How's it going, everybody? And welcome back. I have an extremely special guest today, Jamie Lane, the chief economist from AirDNA. Jamie, appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks, John, for having me. Excited for the conversation.
Yeah, man. As you know, the way I like this to go is to just have a conversation about quite literally anything. So, with that being said, I think I might use AirDNA more than anybody. And obviously, you built AirDNA for the most part, right? So anyone who doesn't know you, can you kind of just explain quickly what you do at AirDNA, and then we'll just jump into the convo.
Yeah, so I'm their chief economist. I actually came in October of 2020 as a VP of research with a team of just me. So in a uh, AirDNA was about 44 people at the time. Had this nice, pretty org chart, and then it was just me by myself of just coming in to like try to make sense of the data and generate research and be an internal expert around the data.
Mhm.
Um, Fast forward to today. As of yesterday, I just took over or promoted to leading our data science, data quality,
Mm.
and innovation teams at AirDNA. So taking a more proactive role in both the data and product that we're generating at AirDNA. Because as of and over the past really couple years, it's just been of like I have ideas and sort of
Mm.
and feed them to the product team,
Yep.
but really no direct oversight over any decision that was being made. So now getting to be a bit more hands-on with the decisions and the teams. And then prior to that, like I was a customer of AirDNA. I was, I think, the first customer getting raw data from them back
Oh,
in
nice.
2015.
Okay.
So met the founder, Scott Shafford, and was able to get access to the entire AirDNA data set at the time, raw data, and
Yeah.
then built a whole bunch of internal tools and did a whole bunch of research in my previous role where I was running hotel research at CBRE.
Gotcha. Cool. This is a perfect timing then, since you just got promoted or changed roles or however you want to word it to being more of an oversight of actually things that are within the AirDNA algorithm and software and tool and how it all the accuracy because um I want to talk about that stuff a lot. I'm
Yeah.
sure a lot of other people want to understand AirDNA almost at a deeper level because quite frankly, people are having a hard time trusting it, right?
Yep.
And I get it to an extent. There have been people out there who have been putting down AirDNA pretty publicly, right?
Mhm.
And I've been extremely frustrated with that because of a couple of reasons. So I'm just going to do a quick little rant and then we'll kind of go from there. The reason why it's driving me nuts is because their alternative option is kind of a joke, right? And the way that they are telling people, "Hey, don't do it this way, do it a different way. Do it this, my way." That way is so much worse in comparison to if they just understood how to use AirDNA, right? In the
Yep.
sense that the ability to accurately predict what the revenue is going to be for an entire year for a property that you're looking at is extremely difficult with their methods. And so then therefore, yeah, AirDNA is not perfect. I think you will say that. I mean, that's you're working on the accuracy team for a
Yep.
reason, right? And so AirDNA is not perfect, but I always think about this because I actually had to stop myself at one point. I was getting frustrated with AirDNA. Like I was
Mhm.
annoyed. I was kind of like all this stuff, and then I thought to myself, if I didn't have AirDNA, I'd be royally fucked. Like I would have I would have nothing, right?
Yeah.
Like what would I do without AirDNA? Like yeah, it's got some problems, but what would I do without AirDNA? Not to put anyone else down, but there's a lot of other tools out there that are even worse, right? So my whole thought here is, yes, AirDNA is not perfect. I think we all agree with that, and you agree with that, and probably everyone at AirDNA agrees with that, right? But the
Yep.
reality is that if you can understand how to find it, how to use AirDNA and how to avoid some of the things that you don't want, but just to get down to the stuff that you do want, and actually take the time to work through the data because it's a ridiculous amount of data, you can get to the answers. And I'm living proof of that probably better than anybody else out there because I've helped find 180 properties and every single last one of them is cash flow positive. I've been accurate by roughly about 30% conservatively, right, on my predictions of what I thought the property was going to make. So if I thought I was going to make 100,000, actually it made 130,000. And every single last decision that I've made has been based off of AirDNA data.
Yep.
So how could air, like, both of these things cannot be true, right? AirDNA cannot be useless and bad and terrible and all this different stuff and still be able to actually use it to find and deploy at this point over $100 million, right?
Yep.
So they just both can't be true. So anyways, that's what we're going to get into. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty detail, and go from there. Anything you want to say on that before I ask you some questions?
Yeah, and maybe and talk a little bit about my philosophy of accuracy, because I think about accuracy in really two main different ways.
Okay.
And they work with two different teams that are sort of under my purview. So there's one is just the ones and the zeros. Like, how accurately are we predicting whether a reservation is happening and at what revenue that reservation is actually generating? So this is, I mean, for any individual property, our ability to predict what that property earned over the last year.
Okay.
And that our data quality team is entirely focused around. We've got all these sort of accuracy checks. We've got tens of thousands of properties that we get a feed of their actual performance that we then check against our modeling, our scraping to make sure that, I mean, we are as accurate as possible on our reservation model and that we're getting the accurate prices for each of those reservations that's feeding through into our data set. And that goes through ebbs and flows of being super accurate, less accurate based on changes that Airbnb, Vrbo, Booking.com are making to their websites.
Okay.
And our ability to scrape the data and change how we scrape it and how we process it is constantly evolving. We've rebuilt our entire scraping ecosystem in the past 2 years based on the changes that Airbnb and Vrbo have done. And then the other way I think about accuracy is on our modeling, and one of those really important ones is sort of our comp set selection. So how are we selecting the comps that feed into a rentalizer estimate? Because that selection of properties, that algorithm that feeds that selection is really important for how someone maybe perceives the accuracy of AirDNA. Because we could perfectly predict what each property has earned historically. But then if we do a bad job of selecting those comps, then we've lost your trust. So we've got now separate teams working on those different problems, and taking an active role in making those things better.
Perfect. So let's dive into these. So rentalizer, I think, is one thing altogether. And maybe we can touch on that. I have my thoughts on it, and you know my thoughts. I mean, we had that conversation, and we can get into that story a little bit later. But I want to focus more on the first one there, and I think it's helpful. And I've noticed this, right? So I've done a lot of presentations teaching people like how to use AirDNA and how to use the data in general. And I always try to explain to people how the algorithm works. And it's almost like this light bulb moment for people where they understand what you guys are trying to do and how you're trying to do it. They go, oh, now I kind of get it, right? Like now I can understand like why you'd get to these numbers or what's happening here, right? And so what I think we should probably do is start with that first one, which is just predicting the annual revenue number and breaking it down a little bit further so that people can truly understand how you're getting to those numbers. And there's a lot of different things I want to say, but let's just start off first. So we'll work through it. So let's start off with, can you, in your own words, try to explain the algorithm? I know you just said it was completely rebuilt, and we can talk about that too. But the idea of what you guys are doing when you're going in there, like how does that work from your point of view?
Let's break it down. So there's primarily 3 different scrapes that are happening. And just for some context, we're scraping Airbnb and Vrbo roughly 40 to 50 million times a day.
Why is that?
I'm going to get there.
Okay.
So there's 3 different types of scrapes. One is the property scrape. So what are the photos? What are the listing characteristics? Like just all the information about that property. That we only hit each property about once every 2 months. Because like your description, your number of bedrooms, bathrooms, your amenities, they just don't change that much, right? So that's one, and there's roughly 12 million properties on Airbnb and Vrbo combined globally. And we're doing all this data collection globally. So it's not just the US. There's roughly 1.7 million listings in the US, 12 million listings around the world.
Right.
The other scrape, really important one, is the status scrape. So is that property available to be booked on any given date out into the future? So there we're looking at the calendar of that property, and what days is it available to be booked in the future. And then since we're scraping that every single day, we could then can see what days were available into the future, and then what day do they go unavailable. And then on the days that go unavailable out into your future calendar, we then take that sort of, let's say a group of 4 days out in September went from available to unavailable. We're then going to group those 4 days together and then model whether that was a reservation or a block.
Mm.
And that process is happening across 12 million listings every day. And then our reservation is modeling on top of that to get our estimates of demand.
Okay. So, in a sense, you're recording the calendar, right?
Yep.
And you're recording what you believe the nightly rate to be for that calendar.
But we're not even talking about rate yet. This is
Okay.
just
Just
if is it available to be booked or not?
okay. I want to talk about booked versus blocked because I know that's a whole thing too.
Yep.
But before we do that, let's talk about the nightly rate because from my understanding, that changed drastically within the
Yep.
past 2 years, right?
Yep. So so that's the third scrape is
Okay.
rate.
Okay.
So up until October of 2023, we could do one scrape per property and get an array of rates out into the future. And now recently that changed, or as of about a year ago, that changed. So now we actually have to go into any individual combination of days out in the future, scrape that itinerary. So from October 1st to October 3rd, if I put in those series of dates into Airbnb's site, I then return that the stay is going to be $300. It's a 3-day stay. The average cleaning fee is this. The average service fee is this. The tax is this. So what is the actual nightly rate? Divide that by the 3-day stay, and I get an average rate over that 3-day period. And then
sorry, go ahead.
And then we go out and do different day combinations out into the future. So sometimes we'll just do a 1 day, depending on the unit's minimum stay. Some days we'll do week long, month long. We'll get what those discounts are. So if it's a weekly, if there's a weekly discount at a property, we will tag whether there's last minute discounts at a property. All these sort of info around the rates we'll sort of tag in the metadata, and then use all that to then model what the rates are on any given day in the future.
So this is where it gets really complicated because and I've seen another person like break this down for me before. And so just to like paint a better picture in people's minds, right? If you were to go to Airbnb right now and you were to book from October 1st to October 3rd, and say that was like the days that you wanted, and you looked at that, the host could have a discount if you were to book those 3 days. And what'll happen is that nightly rate could work out to be $100, right? So it's $100 for those 3 nights. But if you were to actually book from October 1st to October 4th, then the nightly rate, because of a different discount, ends up being $90, right? And so it changes based off of these different options that people have within their calendar. And depending on what days they book, and if it's a week long, they get a different sort of discount that could have happened. And so all these combinations make it significantly more difficult to know what the true nightly rate actually is.
Yep.
Right.
And then one of the recent enhancements that we did was up until last month, we never actually tried to incorporate weekly or monthly discounts into our rates.
Okay.
So if you offered a month-long discount,
yeah,
we did not, and we saw a month-long reservation come in,
yeah,
we did not apply that discount to that nightly rate. We assumed that all that was booked at the sort of
given rate.
average daily given rate. But now we've actually gone back and applied those monthly discounts back through at least the past year of history, so that data should accurately reflect any longer stay discounts.
So would that mean then that the whenever one of those bookings would have came through, it would have technically been showing a higher income for the host for this entire time frame.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So that, and then that's where you can get that inaccuracy, right?
Yep.
Especially if somebody, now what if they had like a 3-day discount? Did you have that, or is it you just saying discounts in general for length of stay?
Discounts in general for length of stay. Yeah.
Okay. So that's like, so is there a reason why that wasn't kept track of, or was it hard to find? Like, was it not
Yeah,
possible to track?
it wasn't. One, it wasn't visible in where we were scraping before. So with the upgrade of the scraping infrastructure, of
Yeah.
having to, that was only available in the itinerary based scrapes. So
Okay.
when we were forced to move to that scrape, we then had visibility into length of stay discounts. So
Okay.
it's like, oh, and for us, it was a trade off of would we rather do one scrape where we get 365 days of data out into the future, where
Right.
we can get really granular in terms of day-to-day
Yeah.
movements and rates and how they're changing, versus would we rather have those discounts? And it's all a series of trade-offs and sort of building the data set.
Of course. And just for other people who don't know, and you obviously will know way more about this, but I've just been hearing rumors about this from different people. Airbnb
Mhm.
has been changing things behind the scenes when it comes to how companies such as AirDNA can scrape the data, like what you guys can see, how you can pull it, the API access, things like that, right? Because your algorithm
Mhm.
goes behind the scenes of the listing and is pulling out all that information. And Airbnb changed up how that all worked
Yep.
not too long ago. And so that happened, right? Correct? Like that big
Yeah,
change
it
happened.
happened, and Vrbo entirely changed their endpoints as they sort of transitioned onto the Expedia platform last summer. So that's what I'm
Okay.
saying. Like, we had to entirely rebuild our scraping infrastructure over
Yeah.
the past year or two, like for everything that we scrape.
And it sounds like it's a lot harder in comparison to what it was.
Yep.
And so now you're forced to get into the really, really granular nitty gritty detail. Now, would you say that technically had already been available, but it would just be significantly more difficult to get to? Now that you guys are forced to actually get to it, now
Yep.
you're grabbing even more data and having to make more sense of these possible scenarios. Would you say that the data now into the future, right? So let's say like 2 years from now, would have a better data quality in comparison to what it did 2 years ago?
Yeah. So as we've been going through this, I would say as of last year, data quality dipped a bit. Now
What?
we've seen
Okay.
as we sort of the endpoints changed, we had to rebuild. It was like rebuilding an airplane while it's still flying, sort of
Yeah. Yeah.
analogy. Like we
Yeah.
got to keep it going. We got to rebuild everything. We got to get it back on. As
Yep.
of now, we're back to parity in terms of accuracy that we were seeing pre, and
Okay.
we're on a path to increase accuracy substantially from and what it was prior. So
Okay.
as we're sitting here next year,
Yep.
I would expect to be able to tell you that our data is more accurate than it's ever been in its entire history. And we're essentially on parity with sort of average accuracy through time right now in the data set. So I feel really good about our accuracy now.
Yep.
If we would have talked last maybe November, I would have been like, man,
Mm.
it's rough right now. So
Mm.
team's been doing a ton of work, and we've made a lot of hiring on our data science org because it is just a much more difficult problem to solve.
Yeah, which makes a lot of sense. I love the honesty, by the way, because like it's you don't have to say that, right? Like the data, you don't have to tell everybody all that information because they have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. They're just seeing the numbers. So to be very real and say, hey, this is what was happening, that means a lot, right? So appreciate that. Did you notice that within the past, let's call it the past year, more complaints come through about inaccuracy?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And say last year there was also a big sort of modeling update on a reservation model. Like I guarantee you saw this. I still see some of it, but there were a significant number of properties where we were showing high revenue that essentially had zero reviews. and we were aware of it. Like that, there was always some of that, and there's reasons for some of it. Like, and a lot of large property managers list on Airbnb, they get all their bookings direct, or at least 80-90% of their bookings direct, and you just don't see much activity on the OTAs. That doesn't mean the bookings aren't actually happening, but these were clearly not real reservations, because we could see the pattern of like, all right, someone was auto blocking their calendar in this sort of way, and we could tell that there was like some sort of pricing software out there that was doing this behavior that was causing these properties to look booked when they weren't actually getting booked. So we made a big update last summer that essentially removed all those, or moved most of those. And I would suspect like 80-90% of them. And that solved a lot of the problems on the statuses. But in something that there's a lot of detail of getting in there of how we found it, how we sort of did it, but we were able to retroactively go back through the data set and remove all those reservations back through time for properties that we didn't deem as accurate.
So this is a good transition. By the way, as we're talking, more and more things are coming up in my mind. I'm like, oh, what about this? Oh, what about that? So I'm making a list, and I'll keep working through them. But I think this is a perfect time because you're talking about listings on AirDNA that have 0 reviews but are showing $500,000 in revenue. And those happen quite a bit. There's one in Scottsdale that pops up pretty well every time you type in Scottsdale downtown. And so I always see it. I'm like, this one's not real. And I use that as an example over and over. But let's talk about what I have referred to in the past as good versus useless data. And I don't like to call it bad because I know that it's still being worked up. But let's get into the details of that, because Jamie, like you wouldn't believe the amount of people that still don't understand that there's good and bad data within AirDNA or useless data within AirDNA. Every single podcast I've ever done, every single presentation I've ever done, I have mentioned the difference between good and useless data in AirDNA every single time. And every single time I see people's eyes go, oh, whoa, right? Like they're every time. And it blows my mind that it's not common knowledge at this point. But I'm trying to make it common knowledge by talking about it a lot, but you're the perfect guy to talk to about it. So can I give you my definition of good? And then I know we can talk about the filters. I don't know exactly where we want to go with this, but like I said, I talk about it every time to make sure people know about it, right? So good data. I always say that good data is data that has been tracked for over 250 days. And we talked about this already as well. On AirDNA, it says days available. And really what that is how many days AirDNA has been recording that calendar's information, correct?
Over the past 365 days.
Right. And it should say days tracked. So I want that changed so bad. But it should, the days available, people get confused by it all the time. That's why I'm bringing that up. I've told you that before, but maybe it'll get changed. So
I guess the difference there, so it would, for new properties, could be a days tracked. So let's say a property's over 10 years old and it someone blocked out their calendar for six months this past year. So that would have a days available of 180 days. And what we're saying is, of the past 365 days, how many days was that property able to be booked?
I logically get that, but people always assume that it means how long the listing's available for through the whole year. What people will see, so if a listing has only been up for 180 days, they'll go, oh, this listing is only available for half the year. That's almost always how people interpret that one. I've read through the definitions and the terminology of AirDNA like 20 times, right? Trying to like make sure I understand. I even had to email you one time about one. And but in that one there, that's another one. Just like when I talk about the difference between good and bad and useless data, I see people's eyes kind of light up like, oh, that doesn't mean that the listing is blocked off for half the year. It's like, no, it's a newer listing, right? So anyways, but maybe you could do days tracked within the past 365 or something along those lines, right? But anyways, So the idea of good data is that you want it to be tracked for I want it to be tracked for over 250 days. Even like 270 is kind of that, because of your guys' filter, that's what I use nowadays. The reason I
Yep.
always say that amount is because um, I find that the revenue potential number tends to be more accurate for what the actual revenue is going to be in comparison to a property that's only been tracked for 180 days. So when you guys are the revenue potential number, there's two different numbers there that show up, right? Revenue potential is how much this property would make over the full 365. Whereas revenue is how much it made during the last 180 days, right? If it was available or tracked for 180 days. And so I never feel comfortable with what the prediction is when it has been tracked for less than 250 days or 270 days. And
Yep.
so that's sort of like that first piece where I go, okay, now I feel comfortable with it. There's only 3 months missing. And if I really feel like it's off, like I can do the math in my head, right? Because I can see like, oh, it's got, another 60 days. That's 2 full months. I know what the next 2 months are. Is it peak season or slow season? That's going to tell me if it's going to be a lot or a little, that the amount is going to go up, and I can gauge if that revenue potential number is actually accurate, right? So that's
Yeah,
like,
and now that, and I know you're an advanced tier user, like you can actually click into that listing and see the historical monthly performance of
yeah,
revenue. So
yeah,
you could know exactly which months are missing and estimate that more accurately than just coming up with a rough estimate.
a rough estimate. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a good point. And when you say that, you're talking about the fact that when you click onto the individual listing, all the information that comes up down below.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And does that only apply to like the top tier
That,
subscription model?
right now, that is only top tier subscription model.
Okay.
And we're going to have some flavor of that data coming more into the uh, pro tier.
Okay.
But yeah, right now, if someone's an advanced tier user, most of our historical subscribers were sort of grandfathered into that advanced tier subscription. So you can
Gotcha.
see for any listing what is the past 5 years of data on occupancy, ADR, and revenue for each of those listings and every listing around the world.
Interesting. I've actually never used that.
Really?
Yeah, I've never gone down and looked and trying to see, because I always just I see what the annual revenue number is. I know the market in general. I kind of have like a feel for what the years have been, but I've never gone down there and actually looked at the individual listing, because I never realized that I could look and see how well did this listing do the last 365 and the year prior to that and the year prior to that, which
Yep.
is kind of interesting. So I'll probably play around with that just to get a feel, always keeping in mind of COVID and the ups and the downs and the COVID markets and things along those lines. Um, so to bring this back to good and data,
Yep.
that's my first metric, right? The second metric is there needs to be a review every single month for the past 12 months, or 10 in the case of it only being around for 300 days, tracked for
Mhm.
300 days. And so if I can see a review every single month for the past 12 months, at least one, and during the peak season, I want to see more than one, right?
Mhm.
And if I can see that, then I'm going to feel confident that that's a full-time host. So then I have a combination of a full-time host and somebody who's actually been recorded for almost that entire time period. And usually the quick metric for this is, do they have 20 reviews? Because I've kind of noticed that if you have 20 reviews, you tend to have been managing for the full year. With
Yep.
that being said, the amount of people that will see like, oh, this listing has 100 reviews, I don't need to look to see if they have a review every single month for the past 12 months. And then you go and look in it, and there's a bunch of gaps, right?
Yep.
So those are my two metrics for figuring it out. And obviously, if they're on Airbnb and VRBO, you got to check both, right? Because sometimes they won't have all the reviews on Airbnb, but they will on VRBO. And then the other part too is if they have direct bookings, it screws the whole thing up for me, right? Screws it all, and I just throw it away. I'm like, all right, like Evolve, Vacasa, I never ever look at their data ever, right?
Yep.
PM big, like if I start seeing a bunch of PM companies in there, or a PM company that has like over 20, I just kind of get rid of that data too. I don't find it very useful. It's hard to trust. So,
And that's one of the things that is called out on the property page too, is if it's managed by a property manager. So we have
good
that
to know.
listed there. So if you click on it, scroll down, you're like, oh, that's managed by Vacasa, you would see it on that page.
Yeah, I never ever ever look at Vacasa data or Evolve. I don't trust either of them just because of all their direct bookings.
Yeah,
Um,
and just for sort of listeners, if you're in some of the larger vacation rental markets, and some of these markets, like, and 60-70% of the listings will be managed by large vacation rental managers.
right.
Um, so that's where we've tried to sort of bring it forward with the filters that you could actually filter to just looking at data from individual hosts on Airbnb.
Yeah, so
Which
much
can,
better.
yeah, for if you're going to be an individual host, and like that can give you a much more realistic view of properties that you should be using as comps.
Yeah.
And and a lot of times it's not because the professional managers are doing that much better. It's because it's actually they do that much worse. And you don't want to assume you're going to perform like a Vacasa property in that market.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Vacasa is almost always lower than everybody else, and we could definitely get into that, but let's not, because
Yeah.
that'll be a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But do you agree
I
with?
don't need any calls from them either.
Yeah. Do you agree with my good data analysis? And mind you, so just to reframe here, right? The idea is that AirDNA has good information, but it has a ridiculous amount of information. And so what you want to do is narrow it down as much as you possibly can. And so that we're only working with specific pieces of data that we can feel really confident about the annual revenue numbers, so that we can make decisions with properties that we're considering to purchase or rent. And so then therefore, if we can make sure it has over 270 days available, that it has over 20 reviews with a review every single month for the past 3 months, and it's not a property management company. And if we can find all of those things, right, then we're going to feel a lot more confident that the data we're looking at is accurate. There's one additional step, but we'll explain that one in just a second. So do you agree with that general consensus of what data to use to help make decisions?
Yes and no.
Okay, perfect. Let's hear it.
I 100% agree. When we're finding historical comps for estimating a property's and what a property could earn on an annualized basis, like
Okay.
those set of filters, like I use when I'm sort of selecting comps.
Okay.
And as I've gotten involved with the product process at AirDNA, now essentially all those filters are in the app today. So you can go into a market, you can click under the listings, you can set that series of filters, and you can only see properties that meet that criteria when you're sort of selecting comps. You can then
Real quick, just so you know, I made a course about how to use AirDNA, and like almost 5,000 people have gone through the entire thing. And I literally teach people how to manually pull the information out, just so that they're working with that data. And now we have the filters, and it just can show you that information. So it's very, very helpful. So I appreciate that.
And then as of, I think it was like 2 days ago, we now have draw a map.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Have you not seen it?
I didn't see it. No, I have AirDNA up in the background.
Yeah. So
you do.
go into the market, you can draw on the map, and you can save all of those geoms.
No way. I gotta share my screen just so I can show people this. This is what I was asking for. So let's say that I'm in San Antonio right now. It's right here for anyone who's looking for it. This is, for anyone listening, the most useful tool that I've come across. So by clicking this, I can grab how do I do this? Hold on. Let's see.
Start clicking. Yeah.
Okay.
You have to do your first dot first, and then you can start drawing around.
Okay. So I got to do like clicks. It's not just like a drag. I was using the Zillow sort of filter way of doing it. So now I just have just that data.
Yep.
That's amazing. Thank you for that. I'm not sure if you did that for me, but you've had that on the other tool for a while, and it's extraordinarily useful. I can't wait to talk about that. I'm gonna make a whole bunch of videos about it. So, is that now? What price tier is that on?
It's only on advanced tier now, but it's aspects of it are coming to pro, especially around doing custom rentalizer, and they'll be coming in Q4. So, we're working on that right now, where essentially all pro users will have access to draw a map as well.
Okay. Sorry, I did cut you off. I got a little excited there, but you were talking about that you agree, and you also don't agree with my reasoning for good data.
Yeah. So where I don't agree is in getting a sense of overall supply in the market, because supply growth is such an important metric for understanding how one, the health of a market, and then two, how much supply you're actually dealing with in terms of new competition. And if you remove out properties with zero listings, and essentially every new property starts with zero listings, and And by removing those, you don't get a sense of how much supply has actually been coming in the past 3 months.
Okay.
And I think and one of the things that's misunderstood about Airbnb is, and Vrbo and just short-term rentals in general, is like how much churn there is in the market of people removing listings, adding listings, and getting a sense of how many new listings have been coming in the past few months. Is really important for understanding the supply picture.
So the main reason in my mind to understand the supply of a market is for saturation purposes, right? Is the market saturated or not? So out of curiosity, I've wondered this for a while. Why is there no metric on AirDNA for saturation levels? Because you can pull out what the annual revenue has been month over month for all the listings and how many listings there are. And so you could do a very quick, like, this is what it is month over month.
Yep. And how I think about saturation, and you tell me your definition.
Yeah.
Is a market growing? Is a market growing supply or growing demand in a way that or is what is happening in terms of occupancy in the context of supply growth? So if a market is seeing declining demand while supply is increasing, that is a oversaturated market. If a market is seeing occupancy increase while demand's increasing, that is a market that is undersatisfied in terms of supply. So looking at the interaction between supply and demand and looking at them separately, and then in the context of what's going on in occupancy, like if a market's growing, if occupancy is staying flat, supply is growing 10%, demand's growing 10%, like it's not an oversaturated market. That's a very healthy market.
Yeah.
If supply is growing 10% and demand's only growing 5%, and we're seeing a 5% decline in occupancy, like on the surface, that tells me that's an oversaturated market. And then I'd also want to look at it in context of the full history of like, all right, am I in a market where occupancy was 10% above average and that this market is just normalizing, which we saw play out through 2021 on?
Okay.
And then that could not necessarily be an oversaturated market. It was an undersupplied market, and it's a market that's normalizing to a healthy occupancy level.
Okay. Interesting. So I'll explain my definition, and you'll see where my hole is. And I want to see how this kind of plays out. But the way that I've explained to people is that let's say there's 100 listings in a market, right? And then next year there's 110.
Mm-hmm.
The number of listings went up by 10%, right? Now, what you want to see is the revenue go from $100 or 100 to also 110, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it increases with it. And to me, if the total revenue for the market increases at the same rate as the listings, then the market is not oversaturated, and the market needed more listings to meet the demand of the people who wanted those Airbnbs. And so then, if that were to be the case, then each individual listing is still making the exact same amount of money year over year, right? Because as a new listing comes in, it just gets filled. But what I have never actually talked about or even considered or thought about is how does the occupancy for the market increase or decrease as that's happening? And that's the third component that you're bringing in.
Yeah. And so the hole that I would poke in your definition is with that 10%, 10 additional properties, they could be entirely different than the other 100. Like they could be 6, 7, 10 plus bedrooms that are running low occupancy, but they look really good in revenue because they're an entirely different profile. So our definition is the same if you just looked at occupancy. Like, did occupancy go up 5% or 10%? Or did demand go up 10% when supply went up 10%? But when you use revenue, that inherently takes into account the ADR of those properties. And especially in small markets, if the ADRs of the new properties coming in is materially different than the existing set of properties in that market, that could cause some issues in terms of comparing revenue.
That's interesting. I'm gonna have to run that one and try it. Like get a look at the occupancy levels of how they're increasing and decreasing. When
so
you said
we do have that in chart in AirDNA where you can look at nights sold or units booked. And you can compare that to listing growth. So we do have the measures of occupancy or of supply and demand in the platform, and you can get to them separately. Yeah.
So you have rental growth here.
Yeah, though the one I use is actually below it, because you can do the full time series and export it. So if you keep going down, it's called a terrible metric. How many listings does this have? Yeah.
Is it in occupancy?
It's right. It was just up. Yeah, it's right there. And then take that from last 12 months to pre-COVID.
Then export it.
So now you've got a measure of listing growth. This is how many listings are in that market over the past, 8 years, 6 years? So that number matches the listing growth up above. So this gives you the full time series of listings. This does reflect filters. So you got to make sure, like right now, this is just reflecting that area that you circled.
Yeah.
And then you can compare that to how does demand change over time.
So where would I go for that?
Just scroll down just a little bit more, just below it.
Okay.
And now open that up to the last 6 years. And so now listing days booked is how many nights were actually booked in that month for stays in that month. And then the pink line is how many listings actually saw a booking. So then in the ratio of those is essentially what is the average number of nights booked in each property in that month. Which is
Could you explain that one more time for me?
So
because I'm seeing now, I'm seeing like 33,000 days booked.
Yep.
And then over 2,300 listings. I see.
Yep. So if you divide 33,000 by 2.3, you get roughly 17 days. So each property was booked on average 17 days in that month.
Gotcha. Okay. And so then how would I take this chart?
So you would export that maybe listings, that listing count, and then you can take the nights booked and then compare those over time and
month by month, correct?
Month by month. Yep.
Yeah.
And look at the growth in each. And the growth in each is going to, like, if demand's growing faster than supply growth, then you're going to see occupancy increasing. And if demand's growing less than supply growth, then you're going to see occupancy decreasing.
Interesting. I'm gonna have to play this one. Like, I'm probably even gonna come back to this recording, listen to this one more time, and go through those steps one by one. But if I understand correctly, I'm exporting both of those, right? Plugging them into a spreadsheet, and then I'm gonna take this is okay. Let me make sure I'm getting this right. So from, let's say, 2018 to 2019, I would want to go September of 2018 to September of 2019, and I'd want to see what the change was there, right? And essentially you're doing that for every month. So then I'm going October 2018 to October 2019 and keep doing that. Then you're going October 2019 to October 2020, right? And I would do that for the number of bedrooms, and then I would also do that for the occupancy chart there as well. Then I would take those and I'd have those two columns side by side so that I could see the variance between those two. And so then if I saw that the number of listings would have increased by 10%, what would I want the occupancy to be doing if it was going to be not saturated?
So for me, not saturated is a stable occupancy.
Okay.
And I'll just show you a market where we see.
So the occupancy doesn't change.
Where the occupancy doesn't change. Yep.
Interesting.
And you can see that in the charts. So we allow you to see occupancy over time. So we can look at August 2024. This is Kissimmee. This is a market that I just knew has been weak in the past few years.
Okay.
So we see that 2022, 3 and 2024 is down significantly from 2019, 2018, 2022, 2021 occupancy levels. So, and I sort of see this 2018, 2019 average as like, this is sort of pre-COVID, relatively healthy, relatively normal. Things really increased during COVID. 2021 was abnormal. And now we've started to see some weakness in demand in Kissimmee. And you can try to get a sense of, okay, is that because demand has been weak, or is that because there's been too much supply coming in? And so when we look at, and over the past few years, we did see demand and come in pretty strong from 2021 up to 2022. And now we've seen demand sort of tailing off a bit. So this is a market in Orlando's just, and poster child for this right now is a relatively weak travel market. Disney's called it out. A lot of theme parks have called it out as people have stopped taking domestic trips to Disney and done sort of overseas trips and things like that. So
this is showing that the occupancy has gone down, and you're saying that is the demand that's showing that demand is the reason why occupancy is going down.
We can go look at
I was going to say the number
supply,
of
like we've actually seeing and year-over-year declines in supply in Kissimmee. So it's not, and it's gone from, and I've filtered a bit, 624 listings to 520. We've seen a decline in supply over this time period.
Yeah. So to make sure I'm understanding this correctly, right? You've got this this weakening in occupancy that you can clearly see over the last 2 years. Then you have to determine, was that because of oversaturation, or are people just not traveling to this destination? And so the quicker way to do it is just to go to how many new listings have shown up in this market over the past 2 years. If that's flat, then you know it's the reasoning that demand has gone down. So separate question here. Before you, unless you want to go through something real quick.
No.
Would you state, because you're an economist, right? So as an economist, my understanding is you're trying to understand what's going on in the market in general. And so you see this one market and you see that it's the number one traveled place in America. Sorry, real quick, could you stop the sharing just so it goes back to the two of us? So you are seeing all of America as a whole. Sorry, let me say that question one more time. You're looking at Kissimmee. It's the number one travel place in America, and you just showed demand is down, right? Over a 2-year stretch. Now, Disney's saying, oh, people are going overseas to go to different places. How do we know that is true and that it's not due to people just not being able to afford Disney, right? People have with tighter, not as much disposable income, right? And if you do see that as an economist, right, I'm sure you take in other factors as well. Does that give you like an understanding of what might happen in the future? Or like, do you start to think like what happens for the economy, what happens for travel when you start to see this? And have you seen that in other markets other than Kissimmee?
Yeah. So I'd say broadly what we're seeing in travel right now, and I'm tracking travel across both hotels, short-term rentals, like airlines, like all forms of travel.
Okay.
And we see very bifurcated demand trends. So
say that again. Bifurcated.
So
what does that mean?
Two different trends happening at the same time.
Okay.
So we see a lot of weakness at the lower end of the income spectrum. So those travelers that earn, let's say, less than $100,000 combined household income have been pulling back on travel over the past year and a half. And we've seen declining stays for those individuals. And that disproportionately impacts some markets like Disney or like Orlando. Where we're
Okay.
seeing really strong growth in demand is those travelers at the higher end of the income spectrum, the business travelers, group like convention travelers, luxury travelers, those traveling to cities, those with the means and ability to travel overseas. There we see higher end hotels and even higher end short-term rentals seeing record highs in terms of occupancy and performance
So how can those both be true at the same time?
because of what we saw play out over the past sort of 2 years. We saw record and decades high inflation that really coming out of COVID, we had record sort of government stimulus sort of come into people's pockets.
Okay.
For those lower income travelers, they saw the stimulus, they saved that stimulus during COVID, and they had it sitting in their bank account. And now you fast forward to last year, they spent all that money. And then had to start paring back on their spending because they no longer had that excess savings.
Okay.
When you look at those people in the higher income spectrum, like they still have that money sitting in their savings, and they're able to and they've pared it and spent it a bit, but they still, and you look in their accounts and the money's still there, and they still have the ability to travel and spend. They've seen their incomes increase. And they've been able to maintain the sort of same level of travel that they had sort of seen in the years after the pandemic. So we have seen, and you see it not only in travel, but in all other sectors of the economy. Like you listen to earnings calls from major consumer companies, and they're like, "We are seeing weakness on the low end. We are seeing McDonald's, Walmart." The like, and it's one thing where you tend to see people pare down of like, all right, I was going to stay in a Holiday Inn Express and now I'm staying in a Motel 6. Like that trip is still happening.
Right.
But when we look at the data, like the people that were staying in the higher end properties are still staying in those, and the people that were staying in the lower end properties just aren't making those trips. And then we actually did some research with STR, the hotel industry data provider. We actually found in a lot of markets like Kissimmee, we actually see a trade down happen from hotels to short-term rentals, where you see the lower end hotel demand decline, but you actually see the demand increase in certain types of properties in these markets. And it's not the 1, 2, 3 bedroom properties. It's the 5, 6, 7 bedroom low ADR properties where people can actually go and save money by getting a larger home and spreading out the cost of that stay over more people. So like short-term rentals ends up being where you pare down your hotel expense too. It's like the hotel tier below the Motel 6.
Yeah, that's interesting. All right, couple things on that. So first question, and this is just something that popped in my brain. I don't know how I haven't had this thought before, but do you think the discrepancy could also be because of people who owned assets and people who did not own assets prior to COVID? So in other words, if you owned a home, your home now has $300,000 in equity, right?
Yep.
If you didn't own a home, you now are paying rent that is double the price of the rent you were paying before. And so you're seeing one end where people are losing money, and another end where people have a ton of money. And could that be a cause?
That's all the sort of squeezing of the same type of, it's all compounds into a certain aspect, a certain sort of group within the American consumer having less ability to travel and another group having a greater. And that example, it's typically the lower income consumer that is the renter, and it's the higher income consumer that is the owner that has built a ton of equity, seeing in both their house, they've seen major gains in the stock market. And we see that as sort of the wealth effect of you haven't sold your home, you haven't sold your stock, you haven't sold your crypto accounts that you sort of built up over time, but that money's sort of sitting in your house or sitting in your account, and it makes you feel wealthier. So
Mm-hmm.
you spend more,
Yeah, you can spend all your
even though your income may not have actually changed.
right. You can spend 100% of your income and still have savings,
You
and you feel
feel
fine.
like you're saving. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that effect, and you can actually see it in the travel data for like, you can see a drop in the stock market, you can see a drop in home values play into people's propensity to spend, all the while they're maintaining their jobs and maintaining their earning power. That the wealth effect does have it can have a material effect on people's spending.
So you're saying that if the houses were to go down, like say like the home values were to drop by 10%, whatever, they did drop, and now people are going, oh shoot, my home value is a little less, right? And they're like, they feel like they've lost money even though they haven't lost any income, and then they actually will pull back.
Yep.
Interesting. Okay. How do you see this playing? Like, what do you think happens? What do you think all this means? What is obviously the question is recession, right? Like, do you see
No, and
good or bad in the
I
next year or two?
yeah, I don't see us going to recession.
Okay.
And one of the good thing, or I wouldn't say good things, one of the impact of this right now only impacting lower income consumers is they are a relatively small percent of overall consumer spending.
Oh,
And
okay. That
consumer
makes sense.
spending is what drives the US economy.
Okay.
Um, so all the while lower income consumers are pulling back, you
Yep.
still have real consumer spending. So what is what is being spent on goods, controlling for inflation, like is still growing 2-3%. So we're still
Okay.
seeing expansion of the overall economy. We're still seeing people drawing down on savings. And whether that's good for the long-term health of the country, like we can debate that. But in terms of what I see happening in the overall economy, I do not have in my crystal ball that we're going to be going into a recession over the next year or two.
Okay. Interesting. That's a good take. It's still, I'm obviously always intrigued by this kind of stuff, like, because I'm always nervous about a recession. I'm always nervous about it. I used to be a financial advisor, and that was like the thing we were always taught to like protect from. And now I help people find properties, right?
Yep.
And how do you lose a property? Well, you can't afford it while the recession's happening, right? Like you
Yep.
literally are losing so much money, you got to sell it, and it's the worst thing you could possibly do. So I'm always just thinking about that in the back of my mind. So it's nice to hear from the economist who's overseeing all of this, your sort of like viewpoint, because mine is just ancillary. I'm not sure if I use that word right, but you know what I mean by that.
Yeah.
I actually want to bring this back to saturation for a second, because it has been a hot topic, and the way we were just talking about like how you can figure it out is fine, right? You can see if an overall market is saturated or not, but there's nuances to this, and I think you're the person to explore these nuances with, because I've had people ask me about them, and I'm like, I need some time to like make sense of this. So I just want to ask you some questions that I've been wondering.
Yep.
As an example, during the Super Bowl, we had properties in the Phoenix Scottsdale area.
Yep.
Every single one of them had like a record nightly rate,
Yep.
right? All the articles that came out after the Super Bowl about that area and about Airbnb was how many people had unoccupied homes, how many people like made absolutely no money, how like it was completely oversaturated, Airbnb bust, like everything.
Yeah.
So again, two completely different stories being told. Can't they technically can be both true at the same time, but there's more things that are happening. And so when people ask me, they go, hey, is this market saturated? I go, well, there's nuances to it. And the nuance is that there's different levels of travelers, for one, right? So if you have the 1 bedrooms compared to the 5 bedrooms, but you also have the luxury 5 bedrooms compared to the non-luxury 5 bedrooms. And so how would you figure out if the luxury 5 bedrooms are saturated in comparison to the entire market as a whole? Is it the same process, just narrowed down to the 5 bedrooms?
Yeah, it is the same process. So within AirDNA, you can do those exact same analysis with the filters. So that is one way where the platform has just fundamentally changed with the relaunch, is
Yeah.
that now all the filters, every chart respects all the filters across the platform, which just didn't happen before.
Say that again. Can you say it one more time? Sorry.
Every chart
Yeah.
reflects all the filters within the platform.
I noticed that as of like a week ago. I'm not even kidding. A week ago, I was going through it. And I was like, this chart is just showing me what I applied on the filter. Like, cause that wasn't what it was
Right.
before. So
Like
I had
before
to triple check it.
you just got like one set of like, here's the breakdown between Airbnb and Vrbo
Right.
and combined. And now you can filter to 5 bedrooms and like, oh, here's the mix of like what's listed on Airbnb versus Vrbo for just 5-bedroom entire home professionally managed listings. Like,
right. Which is kind of it is a game changer for anyone who's actually trying to make sense of saturation levels as an example,
yeah.
right? Because you can actually now pull just that out. Okay, so that's
And
pretty
maybe let
straightforward
me
answer then.
talk about the sort of Super Bowl because we just
Yeah.
saw it play out in Paris too.
Okay.
So, and I talk with so many press people about this. Like it's one of those topics for me that it's just like I get angry about.
Ooh, okay, nice.
Because
Like the Airbnb bust you're talking about?
and Airbnb bust around special events.
Gotcha.
Because there's so much hype around the Super Bowl. There's so much hype around the Olympics that so many people get excited of like, I'm going to list my home on Airbnb and it's going to generate $5,000 a night and I'm just going to crush it.
Right.
So they go around their house, they take photos with their phone, they put them on Airbnb, they list their unit for $5,000 a night, and then they don't see any bookings. And
Yeah.
then they call the New York Post, and then they say like, "This is an Airbnb bust in my market."
Yeah. It's
And
absolutely, I know exactly what you're talking about. You obviously know the listings that we put up and you're putting up a listing. We know how much of a joke that is. It's just a lack of knowledge, right? Of
right.
the person.
So, and I was actually doing an interview with someone about the Los Angeles Olympics coming up in 2028. And
Okay.
they're like, what is the advice for people that want to list during the Olympics in Los Angeles? Is like, you need to start a year in. If you want to get a premium rate during the Olympics, you got to start a year in advance. You got to get professional photos. You've got to build up a review history. There's people that are willing to pay those premium rates are going to want to go stay with someone that they know is actually a real host, not scamming them, and like is a property that they're willing to pay for. Versus someone that has a listing that's brand new, 0 reviews, 0 trust being built into that property. That, so if you really want to make money, you got to go about it in a little bit different way.
So just thinking about this, I guarantee there's not a single listener who has made it over an hour, because we're over an hour now, that is a casual Airbnb-er. Yeah. that advice was just sent out to people who are dedicated to this as a craft. And they're all sitting there like, yeah, we agree with you guys, but they're not listening.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I actually want to mention something about this idea of reviews and premium nightly rates. We have seen the ability to get really good nightly rates with next to no reviews. Mm-hmm. And people are always, and yes, there is a ramp up stage. We know there's some sort of ramp up stage, but people always wonder if reviews reflects the amount of revenue that you make. And this is probably a good question for you. I have a lot of data on this in a very specific way. But would you say that reviews and the review percentage that you have, right? If you have 4.8 compared to 4.9, makes a difference in your ability to increase your nightly rate.
Yes.
Okay.
So I've done some work on trying to prove it.
Okay. Let's hear. I'm intrigued. The reason I'm intrigued is because I hate this question. Let me explain why before you explain. I hate it because people will go, I have a 5-star review home and I've had it for the past 2 years and I've got nothing but 5 stars. And they look at their listing and it's so boring, right? Maybe it's not a bad listing, but it's just boring. Yep. And then I go, well, yeah, yes, you're a really good host and you have great reviews. But if you were to just make your listing more valuable through better entertainment for your guests, you would do way better than just the amount of additional revenue you would make from getting good reviews. Do you know what I mean by that? Is that making sense?
Yeah. No, okay. It is. And I think it goes into, and there's so much that you can do to change the ADR in your property, right?
Yes, so much. There's so many tiny little
Or
factors.
even change the occupancy in your property. Like
Yeah.
you can change your rate, and that if you want a 90%
Yeah.
occupancy, charge $100 a night for your 5-bedroom house.
Make it
Like,
$1, make it
yeah.
$1. You have 100% occupancy. It's amazing.
So I actually made. Can I share a chart on that?
Yeah, of course. Share anything you want.
So,
I saw you look into your other screen. I was kind of hoping you were going to pop open a chart. I was like, I wonder if he's got something there.
Yeah. So this is, I pulled a whole bunch of similar type properties in terms of amenities, bedroom count, same neighborhood, like
Okay.
try to control for all the things. Like they meet all your criteria for good comps. Like they have more than 20 reviews. They're more than available more than 270 days over the past 12 months. Like, and they sort of meet all the criteria of like providing good comps.
Okay.
And then you look at, and so we've got like 30 observations here from $300 to $100, and from an occupancy of 90% down to 20%. And this pink line is the exact same RevPAR.
Revenue per available night. Rental.
Yeah, room night.
Night.
So, and essentially that these listings are earning the same amount over that 1 year period.
Okay, thank you.
So this property at $280 at 38% occupancy is earning the same amount as this property at 85% occupancy and 120 a night.
And obviously the person who's renting it out for $280 a night at 30% occupancy is saving a ridiculous amount on their expenses in comparison. So they technically would be way more profitable, but that's a whole other conversation. Keep going with what you're going with.
So this person's probably only hitting high demand periods. They like doing the weekend special events, like, and only renting it out when sort of demand reached the period where and someone's willing to pay their rate. This person's running a low rate. They're getting booked out the entire time period.
Yeah.
Where you want to be, though, is in that sort of top right quadrant. You want to be above the line. And then when you actually dig into what's causing these properties to be above the line, it's quality photos, it's good reviews. Like average property appears a 4.9 and above, average property down to the left is 4.6 and below. So, and then we went through and actually like built a model to quantify like what the impact is on rate on revenue. So actually controlling for amenities, controlling for market, controlling for size of the bedrooms, all that. And what we find is that so an average property has a 4.76 review rating.
Okay.
A property with a 5-star rating, so perfect rating, earns a 20% higher RevPAR because of that higher review score than the average property.
Okay.
Do you believe that? And now I'm talking about 5-star versus the average Airbnb property at a 4.76.
And you're saying that the homes are similar.
Similar home. I'm controlling for same type home.
Same amenities.
That a property, and it's a mix of both occupancy and ADR that they're getting. One, they're seeing their properties get booked a bit more on average than, and it's roughly split between occupancy and ADR. So they're seeing roughly 10% more occupancy.
Yeah.
And they're seeing roughly 10% more rate because of that higher review score.
So I believe you, obviously, because you're showing me. What I'm thinking about right now is the amount of money, which would be 20%, being sort of left on the table by not managing better, right? Or actually, just realizing this. What's more interesting here is that the difference between a 5-star and a 4.9 star is quite a bit. There's a bigger gap between those two than there is between 4.9 and 4.7.
Yeah. No, having a 5-star rating on Airbnb, like that's good. That's hard. That's
Jeez.
really
You get
hard to do.
one you get one bad review, one 4.7 review, and you drop out of that 5-star category and your revenue drops with it because of geez. Have you seen those memes that have been going around? Absolutely beautiful stay, amazing time, had a great time, 4.7 review.
Yeah.
Bull. Interesting. Okay. That's I'm honestly just like my brain is going right now, like the amount of money that is being left on the table due to that factor and what of a difference it could make. But I mean, 5-star, and I noticed you also had something there about badges too. Could you explain that?
Yeah. So, and clearly we can scrape badges. It's on the pages.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to get a sense of is this guest favorite badge was new, entirely different from Superhost, where Superhost is earned at a host level and badge is earned at a property level. So what was the actual overlap between having a Superhost badge and a guest favorite badge? Because that's where you really start to get into like Airbnb, like surfacing your property top of search. And that's the other sort of impact on this is how, and I think why we see 5-star properties get higher revenue. It's because of how Airbnb incorporates those properties into their ranking algorithm.
That makes sense.
So we just did a big study with Jeff Brown shared at IntelliHost all of his data on rankings. And we paired that with our data to get a sense of how property attributes and performance impacts ranking or on the Airbnb page.
Interesting.
So that is one of the biggest factors for how high you're going to rank.
Yeah.
Is how many stars you have, and if you have any of these guest favorites or Superhost badges.
Wow. Okay. Very interesting. So obviously, like having Airbnb push your listing as much as possible is the best thing you could possibly do. And the combination of all three of these is the best scenario to be in. Right.
And those I like call the super properties. If you got a 5-star review, a Superhost badge, and a guest favorites badge, like you're essentially going to be on the first page of search. And you think about SEO, think about Google. Like if you're not showing up on the first page of Google, like you don't exist, right?
Yep.
And for many properties, if you're not showing up on the first page as a guest starts to search, like you don't exist. Your ability to get booked is severely impacted.
Yeah. I always tell people to use RankBreeze to keep track of like where they are, right? Within the rankings. I used to do that with my properties when I had them. And it's like it's such a useful way to know like why is your occupancy going down if it wasn't working. Can you do that with IntelliHost?
IntelliHost essentially just brings forward the metrics that Airbnb has for you in your Airbnb profile of like your first what page are you showing on, what is your click-through rate, like all your sort of conversion metrics. They go into your account, download that data on a day-to-day basis so you can track it over time, and then do sort of similar A/B testing type things with RankBreeze, but I'm using the Airbnb data to track it.
Okay. That's I've seen IntelliHost obviously. Sorry, what's his name again? I know him. I've had multiple conversations with him. I forget his first name.
Jeff Brown.
Jeff Brown. There it is. I was gonna say Jay, but I'm like, I know it's not Jay. So had multiple conversations with Jeff, but I've never actually used IntelliHost yet, just because I haven't had a need for it just yet.
Yeah, I haven't used it either. All I've done is looked at their sort of raw data that they shared with us. So for users, they didn't share any like.
They never shared.
It was aggregate data that we could use for research.
Well, actually, that's something that I wanted to bring up forever ago in this conversation, but I'm going to bring it up again, which is the idea of how does AirDNA verify that their data is accurate, right? And the way that they do it, from my understanding, is you guys get data from places like Guesty, right? Where Guesty has the actual revenue of every single listing. Now they're not seeing the actual. You guys are not seeing the actual. There's information that's hidden to protect the client, right?
Yeah. So, up until last year, we had to rely on partnerships with other PMSs to get data, of which and we had sort of restrictions around how we could use it. Now we actually have our own data. We bought a PMS.
Oh,
So
okay.
we
What'd you
own,
guys buy?
we bought Uplisting.
Oh, okay.
So we've got the data from the users that use Uplisting, that we don't incorporate that data into our AirDNA data set.
Yeah.
But we do use it to track our accuracy, because we can
Gotcha.
see every reservation coming through on a day-to-day basis. And we actually track this every day. Like, what are all the reservations that came through on Uplisting? What are all those reservations that we modeled in our AirDNA data set? And then which ones did we get right? What ones did we get wrong on both the status scrape and the price scrape? So we can get a real-time view of our accuracy every day.
Is that now deeper technical question here? Is Uplisting in just the United States, or is it in Europe? Is it in multiple areas?
It's all over the world. Their
Okay.
primary user base is in the US and UK.
Okay. Interesting. That's got to be super helpful to be able to.
Very
I'm
helpful.
excited. I'm excited for AirDNA's accuracy with over the next 365. I'm looking forward to it. You're getting my hopes up.
Yeah, it's helped us a lot in terms of testing. And then we also have through our property benchmarking system, so anyone can connect their Airbnb listing to AirDNA through their iCal or through connecting through the Uplisting PMS connection, and then use and actually track the performance of their property against a comp set that they select. And so we'll show you and your forward occupancy, your forward rates, and how that's comparing against your comp set. And when you connect with us, then we get, and obviously we get access to your performance data that we can then use to check our accuracy too. So we have about, I think we have over 100,000 users that are connected there. So we're using that to track our accuracy as well. And we've been doing that for some time.
That's super helpful.
Yep.
That's great information to have. I've got some other things too I want to kind of run through here that I've been thinking about, and it's hard to find a transition to make them happen. So I'm just gonna throw them out here so we can get them answered.
Yeah.
Booked versus blocked. I talked about this a while ago. I can see you rubbing your face. Does that mean that this is gonna be a complicated one? Getting ready for it?
Yeah, I'll be super transparent here. And it's because we're working on the reservation model some right now to improve it. So we've got, and I've spent a lot of time sort of digging into the accuracy of our booked versus blocked algorithm.
Okay.
Our ability to track stays less than 30 days is pretty good.
Okay.
Less than 14 days is really good.
Okay.
Our algorithm picking up stays and the difference between booked versus blocked for stays greater than 30 days is not great.
In other words, just to clarify for people, trying to determine if a host went in there and blocked off the next 60 days or if they got a 60-day booking.
Yep.
Okay.
And we've generally erred on the side of conservatism here in building the model of we'd much rather miss a 60-day booking that someone got than assume that a 60-day block that someone made in Cape Cod in the winter was actually someone staying in that market. The seasonality of vacation rental markets is intense. And our ability to pick up that seasonality is really important for estimating property performance. And so when we look at the error, it's much more that we're getting false negatives, i.e. we're saying something was a block when it was actually a booking, versus us saying false positives, saying something that was a booking when it was actually a block. And,
that's good.
And when you think about people making major decisions off our data, like I would rather lead towards being conservative on underestimating occupancy than overestimating occupancy. And that's what we've leaned towards historically.
So got to ask you a question then, because markets that are very seasonal in the sense that like they don't do well over winters. So Panama City Beach, the entire 30A, pretty well. Then Myrtle Beach is the other one. And I think think Broken Bow is another one, but I think I'm wrong on that. Anyways, but markets like that where you have 2 to 4 months that are very, very good, and then you have 8 months that are bad, and most people shut off their listings for at least 6 months, right? They just
Yep.
shut them down. So if I've struggled with these so much because when you try to use the logic that I just explained of like going in here and then taking a look at the reviews and trying to see a review every single month for the past 12 months, you're going to see it over the summer, over the peak time. But then when you get to the winter, there's nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, mind you, in this example, there isn't. So there you go. So February to September, there's nothing. And I bet you if I went to the VRBO, it would be the same idea. But this here has
Mm-hmm.
been such a struggle for me.
Yep.
And what it does is it almost wipes out these entire markets where like I can't feel confident in any of them. So if I understand you correctly, you're saying that the number that you're seeing here
So then what I
tends
would suggest going is then click on that listing and go and look at the property level history and see if we're modeling revenue during the off months.
like this here.
Yeah. So we saw, January occupancy at that's probably one booking that we saw, probably coming off of the holidays.
So you're
So
saying that this would be a way to know that there have been no bookings during this time period.
yeah, at least we're assuming we're not assuming bookings, and like I would even click over to the revenue, and so you see the super seasonal, like it is like so how much revenue are we actually assuming in January for that property? So peak months, and you're getting $28,000 a month. Then you go to January, and like, what did we estimate in that month?
$910.
Yeah.
Wow, what? I feel like an idiot. I've never used this. This is
So that could get you way more confident in using the data, right? Of like, all right, like AirDNA isn't assuming a ton of revenue for this property in the off months. Like, there's no reviews, and or you could take that $910 off the revenue estimate.
Sorry, just gotta watch my I gotta watch it for a second. Okay, I just gotta watch it for a second.
That's fine.
she was placed on the ground in the office, and I felt bad her sitting there. So just picked her up. This is Remy.
Aw, hi Remy.
She's gonna join us. So that's a game changer. That actually tells me that I can go into this market. I'm gonna pull this back up. I can go into this market and I can actually feel confident about this listing because the revenue that you are showing here is not inflated by somebody blocking the calendar over the winter months and you showing a bunch of revenue during January, February where they wouldn't have had any revenue.
Absolutely. Yep.
My God, that is huge. In other words, this property making 145 could be fairly accurate. I'd have to look through a lot of different things, but that it could be accurate.
Yep.
What's his name? Taylor
has
been trying to get us to buy in Panama City, and I keep saying no. I'm like, I'm not doing it. I'm not using it. He's like, there's a specific property that he keeps pushing. A specific property that he keeps pushing, and I'm like, I just don't feel confident with it. I can't feel like because of all these different reasonings. So I'm going to go through all that data like very shortly to actually get a lot more confidence with it and go from there. Okay, cool. Book first blocked. That's a great understanding and a way to actually navigate that I haven't been able to navigate. Next one is service fee.
Yep.
So you mentioned service fee at one moment, and it's my understanding that your annual revenue numbers do not include the service fee that goes out to Airbnb, correct?
Yeah, and that was actually a recent change that we made.
So it used to include it.
We used to include the 3% host fee in it, but not the guest fee. So you think about the Airbnb service fee. So there's the 3% charged by the host, or charged to the host, and there's the 12% charged to the guests.
Yeah.
We included the 3%. We did not include the 12%.
Right.
What Airbnb has been doing over the past year is and especially outside of the US, is moving more hosts, especially professional hosts, to host only service fee, which is 15%. So if
Okay.
you're looking at a market where there's a combination of hosts taking 3% and other hosts taking 15% off, like
Yep.
that data is no longer comparable.
Right.
So
Right.
what we had to do was we had to just make the cut of like, all right, we're not going to include any service fees now in the data. So as of, I think it was a month and a half ago or a month, we got rid of all service fees. So for the average listener, you would only see like revenues decrease by like 3%. Like most people don't notice a difference of 3%.
No. Yeah.
But if you were operating in Australia, you would have seen our revenues decline by about like 12%.
Gotcha. For all of our Australian listeners who are out
Yeah.
there, we do have some. I have people reach out to me from Australia.
But so now we're tracking it in real time. So as hosts do a host only fee or the split fee, hosts and guest service fee, like
Yep.
we're going to see as a property moves from guest fee to host fee, and then we'll be tracking that service fee accordingly. And then you can know that all data in AirDNA is absent of all service fees back through the beginning of time now.
Is there a reason why? Oh, back to the beginning of time. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, so
Is there a reason why?
we made that change back through like the beginning of time.
Okay. Is there a reason why you guys were including the 3% fee, even though the guest doesn't actually, or the host doesn't actually receive that?
Because it was showing up in the aggregate rate that we were seeing as we scraped.
Gotcha. Interesting. Okay. For quite a while, I've just been assuming that it was the nightly rate plus the cleaning fee. I don't know why I didn't consider the service fee in there, but anyways, interesting. So another one I wanted to bring up is property management companies' data.
Yep.
So I noticed this and this might have just been due to the whole change with the Airbnbs, like with Airbnb and how you guys had to recalculate all of the algorithms. There's been one specific property management company where the revenue numbers were just like quite a bit different. And so I started to pay attention to property management companies as a whole. So you come across any property management company in any market that had, even if they had like 10, and you can always tell because they would have the their logo instead of the picture of a person and the name of the host and all that kind of stuff. Yep. And I get so squirmy every single time I see it, and I just don't like to use it. Yep. Because if I see one variance or it doesn't really make a lot of sense, I have a hard time believing the next one. Does that have to do with the way the data is scraped, or does it have to do with the way that the property management companies are managing?
Yeah, so it had to do with, so this was a change we rolled out in late 2022, I think, and where in tracking our data accuracy, we saw a meaningful difference in the accuracy between large property managers and individual hosts. So it was like the individual host data was great. Some of the large property manager data was not great.
Okay.
So then we went to, and actually how we figured that out was we're scraping the same properties on Airbnb and Vrbo. And we could actually see like, okay, the data is looking good here on the Vrbo scrapes. It's not looking good here in the Airbnb scrapes. Like, let's try to figure out why. And it was from the endpoint that we were scraping that they connected to Airbnb through an API. So the large property manager directly connected to Airbnb either through their PMS or directly. And that was causing something wrong with our scrapers. So we actually changed how we scraped the status scrapes, like when we rebuilt that, so that we were getting the accurate data for both individual hosts and the large property managers. So what we did to actually fix that in the data set is for all the property managers that we could identify that the data was wrong, we went through and backfilled all the Vrbo data because we were like, we've got the good data over here. We might as well use it. and then sort of turned over to the new scraper, so that we're made sure we were getting accurate data going forward for those large PMs.
That's interesting. I find that interesting because I've been looking at this. I'll talk about how I go deeper into the data, right? So, I was talking about like good versus bad data or useless data, and I said there was one last piece of metric that I use to determine if it's good data or not. And what that is I take the data and I manually put it into a spreadsheet, or at least I used to before I had the almighty Tableau. And and so what I would do is I'd clean up all the data with using my different metrics, and then I would go through them one by one. And what I'm always looking for is a story to be told, right? I want to see that the properties that are making the most amount of money logically make sense, that they're making more money than the ones below them, and that story continues as I go through. But every once in a while you see this, ugly listing that is making as much as a beautiful listing. And it's like, well, that doesn't make any logical sense. And it is the anomaly. And what ended up happening was like these property management companies tended to be in that section, right? And it was coming up more often than not. So I find it interesting that from me doing this process, there was actually something going on with those numbers. And it wasn't just the way that the people were managing the properties. Because that's what I used to say. I used to be like, people would be like, why don't you trust property management companies? I'd say, I think they're just, turning the listings on, turning them off, and, changing, all these different little things. And that's why the data is not coming up the way it's supposed to come up. But you're saying it's an actual endpoint issue.
Yeah, it was an endpoint issue. When we looked into it, it was only impacting like 3% of the overall listings. So it wasn't actually showing up in a lot of our sort of data quality metrics, like on our dashboards on like the overall health. But when you actually dug in and looked at some of these property managers' data, it's like, all right, this clearly isn't right. Like, let's understand how deep of an issue this is, what it's affecting, how many others. And it was like a few hundred property managers that it was really impacting.
Gotcha.
And so, yeah, then it was figure out a fix and then implement that fix throughout the data set.
Okay. That makes more sense. That, and again, it wasn't like all of them, but it scared me away from all of them because of that reasoning, right? So I was like I'm not taking. I don't like to take the risk at all because sometimes you don't need it, right? If I have 100 listings and then I find like 20 that don't make sense, I'll just get rid of them, and then I'll just work with the remaining 80. And sometimes it's you have 10 and you get down to 5, but I'd still rather only use those 5. All right, those are all the questions that came up while we were going through that first part of the conversation. But I have another one here that I had earlier, which was the difference between revenue and revenue potential and why sometimes there's no difference.
Yep.
So that's the question.
Yeah. So,
and sorry, if I could just show my screen before you go in there, just so people see what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So when we're here, right, we're on here. This one's been around for 276 days, right? Yep. And within those 276 days, it's made $169.
Yep.
That's what that is stating. Now, the number here, revenue potential, is showing 221, meaning that this is what you expect it to make for the remainder of or over an entire year, right? A full 365. So one thing I want to point out here is that I strongly recommend for people to use this number over this number, because I used to use this number back in the day. And what would happen is I'd come across a property like this one, right? And I would go, oh, it's only made 169. Then I come across a property like this one and go, oh, it's 178. But this one would be way better than that one. And I was like, how is it making less money? And it wasn't that it was making less money. It just hadn't been available and renting as long. And so then this number here is more of an apples to apples number. And it's a better number to actually see the patterns in the data, right?
Yep.
But then if I were to scroll up right now, you've got this one that's been around for 321 days, and it's got a revenue of 250, but then the revenue potential is the exact same, but yet there's still over a month to go. So that's the little thing that I've been wondering.
Yep. So, for a property that is, let's say that first one, the 276 available nights one.
Yeah.
That property more than likely is more than a year old, and that difference between 365 and 271 is block nights, and we estimate the revenue potential during block nights. More than likely, the property, the 321, Like,
Let me
th-
let me share my screen so you can go through these. 'Cause I'm missing it. So let's do. Were you saying this one first?
uh, yeah,
Two
the one
two.
for 276. Yeah,
Okay.
so that is a property that's been around for a while. They had probably 89 nights blocked in their calendar, and then we estimated the revenue during those blocked nights of what it would have earned. So average rate, average occupancy for that property, or take into account seasonality of the market to
Yeah.
estimate that what revenue it would have earned if it was available 365 days.
Okay.
So, and that I would agree. I would much rather use that 221 number than the 169 number.
Yes. Much better to use.
If you scroll down to the other property, more than likely that is a property that has come on within the next last year. And with the relaunch of the website, what we stopped doing was if a property was new, let's say it came on, it was only available for 30 days. And then our revenue potential number would show like a magnitude higher than that of because we'd estimate what it would have earned the rest of the 335 days. What we stopped doing though was estimating revenue for time when the property wasn't listed. Only estimating revenue during times when the calendar was blocked. And that was in large part because our algorithm for estimating that wasn't great. Most of the properties that are brand new, you just don't know enough about the property to estimate 365 days of revenue off of 30 days of it being available.
That is very interesting. I did not know you guys did that.
Yeah.
So if I had a listing and I've only had it up and running for 180 days, right?
Uh-huh.
You're only going to tell me what the revenue is going to be over 180 days. And that's why those two are showing the same.
Yep.
Whereas if I had a property that's been running for a few years, but I block off half the calendar every single year, you'll
Yep.
predict what the full revenue would be for that. Okay. It can get confusing when you're going through and you don't know which one's which, right?
But that's where you can now click into the history. I really want to get a listed
True.
date on that property card. So you know the date that we started tracking that property, so you can tell, or maybe even like a new flag that this is a new property within the last 365 days.
Yeah.
Like some sort of indication that this is partial year data.
So okay. If they've been blocking the calendar, usually they're not blocking it for 11 months, right? So a listing's been around for 3 years and they're only blocking 2 months, right?
Yep.
And so you guys feel comfortable to be like, this is what's going to make over the rest of that time period. And it can kind of like every day, it's sort of the same thing where the next day it's still like the 2 months.
Yep.
Whereas the alternative way is like, they've been around for 30 days. Now they've been around for 60 days. Now they've been around for 80 days. And you would have to almost like repredict what that they're doing over the full year every single day to try and
Yeah,
predict
and
that.
we run that model every month, so it's called a revenue potential model.
Okay.
And so we get to the end of the month of September, and then we would estimate what it would do during October and whatever those months are still in the future. So it's not updating every day; it's updating once we get past the end of the month. So
Gotcha. But
yeah.
except for the listings that haven't been around for an entire year.
If they haven't been around for the entire year, we're not updating. We'll show the revenue history for that property. Yeah, we would show like up to that date what it would earned, but we wouldn't sort of in the month for the month estimate the rest of that month because we're not estimating time that it wasn't available.
So that is just as a call out, right? For myself using it, just thinking about this as I'm going through. If I'm looking at the calendar and I'm going through this, right? And I didn't know that, I would see this variance here and that would make sense to me. But if I would see this, I go, well, that doesn't make sense to me. But technically, this property will make more than 250. And now that I understand this reasoning here, I can understand that this would be higher. Now, with that being said, is there a certain period of time where you could start estimating what it would make over the full year? Because I feel like with this property here, it should show what the revenue potential is. because you're close enough and you have enough history within this market
Right.
and with this property to now estimate what it would be.
Yep.
So
No, that is fair. Of like, if it's 11 months old, we should be able to get a full year estimate. But yeah, it was just and we're definitely going to be taking a look at it as we sort of, and we're rebuilding Rentalizer right now. Of like, what do we want to actually take into account when estimating revenue potential, and what is that time period that we do?
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I'm assuming that there's got to be, even it's like, okay, they made it to even like 6 months, made it 6 months. We got 6 months of data. We know this market's seasonality. They'll likely end up at X, but anything prior to those first 6 months is just how much they did during that time period. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking out loud, but you guys go and create this so we can use it,
Yep.
Anyone who's listening, by the way, this is complicated. Okay. So if you're saying I thought about this as we were talking. Anyone who says that AirDNA is useless or AirDNA is crap, it's not AirDNA, it's you. You are the problem. That's right. Am I wrong in saying that? Because
saying that, not me.
all right, I'm saying it. I've got no problem saying it because we have just gone through so many little nuances of like what to avoid, right? What to look out for, how to understand what's happening in this scenario. We're working with, what would you say? There's 12 million Airbnbs.
12 million or 12 million or 10 million on Airbnb, roughly 4 million on Vrbo, roughly 2 million of those cross listed. So
And then
12 million unique listings. Yeah.
And then you are how many data points on a daily basis? Didn't you say like 40 million, 50 million, something like that?
Yeah, 40, 50 million scrapes a day. Yeah.
A day. So people are complaining, right? That you're taking well over billions of pieces of data and trying to make sense of it in the best possible format. And there's some stuff that's not perfect. And people are saying this is bullshit, it's useless, blah, blah, blah. The problem is you don't know how to navigate it. You don't know how to make sense of it. You don't know what to look for, what to avoid. And I'm saying this in a very bold way because I have taught endlessly for people how to understand this. And mind you, not everybody has seen my stuff, and that's fine. And probably the people who are still watching right now are diehard people who are really loving this kind of information, right? So it's probably not useful. So in other words, if you are watching this and you're still watching it, please share this with more people. Let other people understand that there are ways to understand and navigate the Airbnb data to get to those answers.
And I will say, like, the fact that we rely on you, John, to create these videos on how to use AirDNA means that broadly we failed at doing the right sort of education for our users of the platform. The fact that
I was actually going to bring that up.
Yeah, some of the things that I'm saying, like, that you haven't heard about, like,
right,
are tools that we've launched that you don't know about. Like, we are putting a bigger emphasis on education. So you'll see coming out.
Bring me in. Can I come and teach? Can I be the AirDNA coach?
So we launched like this new site like 11 months ago now, and up until like a month ago, the learn section was blank. Like
that. I've been waiting for it to come out.
That was a huge miss. And then even then, when we came out with these videos, like they weren't great. Like, so I've actually sat down with our marketing team and we've re-recorded all these, and we're going through a process of editing them and getting them up. So we do want to make the education, the use of the AirDNA platform easier. We do want to create better understanding of how to interpret, how to use the tools. Right. So it's definitely not going to happen overnight, but it's something that we realize is a miss and that we need to do better on.
So agreed. And I genuinely have been like, I checked that learning section quite a few times just to see what would come up. I'm just realizing now that you guys do have videos in there. I obviously haven't checked in a little bit, but I've been thinking about it, and I feel like there needs to be like think about how much I learned on this chat just now by going through this stuff. And I consider myself to be like one of the most well-versed people with AirDNA. And yet there's a bunch of stuff where I didn't know it. And I would love a way to learn these things and like keep getting better. And the thing is there's like, I should not be the person teaching everyone how to use AirDNA data or data in general, because I don't have a data background. Like I didn't go to school for it, nothing. I'm just trying to like make sense of it. Right. So the way that you navigated saturation levels there. I'm like, I've never even thought of that, right? But it makes complete sense. And I'm going to have to go back, rewatch this, learn it, and actually put it into practice to make sense of how to do that. So I was also thinking, like, just going to throw this out there and we can talk about it another day. But, creating, like, I've created, I think it's 6 courses now on how to understand Airbnb data, with one of them being 40 hours long, right? But I've been wanting to do a AirDNA tutorial refresh, right?
Mhm.
Where I go in and explain how to use AirDNA. Almost like I wish I could do it with you, where it's like,
Yep.
let's do it together. Let's go together and like walk people through it, and you walk me through it, and we'll talk about how to bring it all together. Maybe we'll make a little series out of it or something. And then you guys have your YouTube channel and you guys have your site, but like let's get it onto my section too, because now people have started to rely on me to understand these things, and if we could create a little AirDNA tutorial with Jamie Lane, like going through it, it would
Yep.
make a lot more sense to go that way. And then you get into like, how do you understand saturation, right? Imagine just that video, how to understand saturation, and teaching people how to do it would go a long way too, right?
Yeah, and that's where, and I'm trying to get out there, and
Yeah, for
agreeing to
sure.
do things like these, and like where we just
Yeah, I
talk about
appreciate
it.
it. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I've probably been on as many podcasts as you over the past year, where I'm just
Yeah.
talking about AirDNA, how to use the tools, and getting the direct feedback, and bringing to the team of like, where they know like drawing map is big and that they need to build it, and they need to build it as quickly as possible and get it out there.
So happy about that. I can't wait to use it. Because I've
So
been
yeah.
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
And we've got and roadmap, like as I mentioned, like rentalizers really high on the list, for
Mhm.
the next quarter, of
Yeah.
really creating, and one, making the algorithms better on how we select comps,
Yeah.
and then two, making the tool easier to add remove comps to,
Yeah.
and if you want to go through and select, like, I only want rentalizer running off of properties on the coast or in this neighborhood, I don't want you sort of pulling back and taking into account all these
Yeah.
properties off coast, like, that you can do
Right.
that. Like, that shouldn't be rocket science.
No.
um
We'll talk. So I've been very purposely not bringing up Rentalizer.
yeah,
And
I know
so
you have your opinions on it,
yeah,
and
so when once that's
maybe we hold off talking about
yes,
rentalizer until we roll out the new version,
exactly.
because
Let's
I've got I was actually meeting with our data science team before this. We've got Rentalizer
mm,
2.0, 3.0, 4.0, and 5.0,
geez.
like sort of
Okay.
laid out on like
Yeah.
what we want the roadmap to look like, because we
Yeah.
haven't touched the tool in like 4 years,
Yeah.
and it needs a refresh desperately.
Yeah. And again, I'm gonna hold off my opinion. Once that's changed, shoot me an email. We'll schedule another call and we'll rip through it and take a look at all the different little changes that have happened. Um, so this has been awesome. Like we just went almost 2 hours. I could probably go for another hour. I definitely have more questions for you. Or maybe have to do this again. The only thing I want to ask, and I didn't want to bring it up too much, but you worked with us on the search side,
Mhm.
right, to help you find a property. Obviously, there's the whole series that's coming out on AirDNA for people to be able to watch your entire process, which I'm watching them as soon as they come out because I'm super intrigued by all of the different little things.
Yeah.
Um, is there anything that we could have done better? Like, sorry, what was a good side of it, and is there anything that we could have done better to help you in that process? And just for anyone who doesn't know, Jamie is one of the people who went through the property finder service. You're about to get your listing like actually live, and so when that goes live, I'll make sure to share it as much as possible. I'm going to be really excited about that as well.
Yeah.
But is there anything that you could share about what we did well and maybe what we could improve?
No, and I guess the things to improve, and for me, it's like, and being an AirDNA guy, like, I understand the AirDNA data, I understand the comp side, like, and what I was really looking forward to leveraging from TechVestor, and from STR Search, is like your experience on the operations side and really understanding what it's going to cost to operate this property,
Mm-hmm.
the cost of minitizing it, of getting it set up, of all that sort of stuff. Because like talking with Taylor, like, he has the cost of every single amenity that you could possibly
Just
like
right up
do just
there.
in the top of his head.
Yeah.
But that didn't seem to be the case like throughout the process of like actually modeling it out, and then really understanding the expense side. Like, yeah, we can get rough
Mm,
like ein OpEx expense and ratios, but like really digging in a bit deeper on like what, because top line's great.
Yeah.
Top line's a big piece of it.
Yeah.
But in terms of really operating a profitable property, like really understanding expected expenses, both on the upfront setup and on the ongoing operation side, like I would love to spend the next 2 years like working with companies like TechVestor and all the other major investors and like aggregating together all their expense data and like being able to bring that forward to investors of like, here's real expenses, real maintenance, real like capex of ongoing property operations, so
Per
they
market.
really understand that. But like in the meantime, like I sort of have to rely on people that are doing it at scale that have real experience. So that was one thing where like I want to get to the next level of like expense data.
Gotcha. So if I understand what you're saying correctly, you're saying that we could have done a better job at breaking down the individual operating expenses that you could have expected, and also the setup cost of what you could have expected.
Yeah.
The setup cost, it's like night and day difference from when we started with you. So we have a whole section for that too. We break it down, and it's depending on like who you use to set that up. So we've heard that feedback, and we have definitely made an improvement on it. The operating expense, we still have it as just a percentage based off of the revenue per market.
Mm-hmm.
It is loosely tied to not loosely, it is tied directly to our understanding of each of those individual markets. But I think if we just had a section in there, even if it was on another tab, so it wasn't so confusing, of all the different expenses kind of broken down, so that people could play around with that to see what that actual difference would be for their specific market, like what the percentage would actually be, and see how far off or accurate we are when it comes to that ratio. I think we could definitely do a better job on that. Well, that's good to know. Appreciate that. That's good. I just gave you feedback on AirDNA for 2 hours straight, so it's good to hear how we can improve on our end as well.
Yeah, but it was a fun experience working with you guys.
That's good to hear. We thoroughly enjoyed working with you as well. And come back for the next one. We'll help you with the next one as well. Jamie, appreciate you big time for being here, man. This has been an absolute blast. I think we got to do it again. So if anyone is still listening, if you made it all the way to 1 hour and 51 minutes, let me know if you want Jamie to come back once again and we can go even deeper. But thank you again, Jamie. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean.